let's talk about culture shock. Your textbook presents a couple different views of culture shock, one by Oberg and another by Adler. Oberg's is probably the most famous. Oberg starts with the honeymoon stage. Everything is exciting and new. This is what Adler refers to as the context stage. But as the individual gets more involved in the new culture, they become more aware of the differences. They get discouraged and confused. This is Adler's disintegration stage. This is still on the downward side of the U. Culture shock may begin in Adler's disintegration stage, but when the individual reaches their lowest point, they are in the deepest part of culture shock, which Adler refers to as integration. The term Adler uses doesn't make any sense to me, but his description of this stage as experiencing anger towards and rejection of the new culture makes sense. And actually, the anger doesn't even have to be towards the new culture. It could just be angry almost at everything, at yourself, at life. It's just anger. Adjustment is the early part of the upside of the U. The individual is negotiating with the new culture, figuring out what to adopt and what to not change. Adler calls this autonomy. Eventually, the individual reaches recovery. They have become bicultural. Adler refers to this as independence. The individual can treat both cultures with respect. There are a couple of problems to be aware of, though. One is that many people do not realize that once they have gone through these stages, they will likely experience pretty much the same stages when they return to their home country. This is most commonly referred to as reverse culture shock. This is one of the issues that EFL teachers need to be prepared to deal with. In other words, the EFL teacher should teach about the stages of culture shock for students who are heading to a new country, because awareness is half the battle of efficiently negotiating the stages. But EFL teachers should also teach stages of culture shock to students returning or repatriating to their home country. These students often find it very frustrating because they are no longer the same people they were before they lived abroad. Their biculturalism may become a big stumbling block to their re-entry to their home country. Another problem is that many people think that these stages are optional. In other words, they won't happen to them. But the conflict of cultural adjustment is inevitable. What is not inevitable is how long we spend in each stage and how we handle the stages. Of course, these stages can be unconsciously negotiated, so someone may go through the stages without being aware they went through them. The other issue is that sometimes people think that if they make it through the stages once, that is it. The rest is what we call smooth sailing. Unfortunately, that's not true. This U or W is a little like a roller coaster ride. A roller coaster doesn't just go through the curves once and that's it. It keeps going around and around. Also, the culture shock ride can start over from any point in the curve. So it is possible to get stuck in a loop between the honeymoon stage and culture shock stage. Or any of the stages can be looped. I remember these stages from my times in Japan. The first time I went to Japan, I was there for 2 months, and I spent most of the time in the honeymoon stage. When I got back to the US, I spent the next 6 years planning and dreaming of going back to Japan. Finally, after 6 years, I returned to Japan to work for 2 years. However, almost as soon as I stepped off the plane, culture shock hit. I remember thinking, what in the world was I doing? Why did I experience culture shock so quickly? Well, there wasn't any real major reason. I spent the first week with other people from the US. But if there was a trigger, it was probably a very small earthquake that happened after getting off the airplane. It was my first time to experience an earthquake. I did go on and I gradually made it through my culture shock and almost assimilated into the culture. For example, when I got sick and had to go to the hospital, I chose to stay in a Japanese hospital in the city I was living in so that my Japanese friends could come visit. The U.S. missionaries couldn't understand this choice. They thought I should have gone to the hospital in Tokyo for Anglophones. For me, I stayed where I was most comfortable. How about you? I would guess that most of you have had your own experiences with culture shock.